It can't just be about nature and climate. It has to be around the interconnection and the interdependencies of people. And then the other part of the definition I really like about regeneration is that it's recognizing it has to be systemic. It's something that isn't just about an individual business. It's almost about that interconnection with the wider system. Welcome everyone to Tea Talks. Really excited to be here today for what's going to be a fantastic conversation. My name's Charmian Love, and I have two roles I'm here representing on today's Tea Talks. I'm executive in residence at the Saïd Business School, where I co-teach an MBA course on regenerative business. I also hold the role as Chief International Advocacy Officer at Natura, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the really interesting things that are happening at Natura as it relates to regenerative business, and that is the topic of our conversation today. Now, I am incredibly excited because I am joined by a very good friend of mine who's come all the way across from Brazil to join us for this conversation. Ines, I'm so happy that you're here. Welcome to Oxford Tea Talks.
Thank you, Char. So I am Ines Francke. I am a sustainability senior manager for Natura Cosmetics, and I'm very glad to be here with you.
Now, the topic for today is regenerative business and the journey to being a regenerative business. So maybe we can start, Ines, by just chatting a little bit about the journey Natura itself has been on. Obviously, there is a lot of energy that's happening around this word regeneration, but what do you feel like it really means in the context of Natura?
I think it's really a weird question for us because I have been with Natura for the last 19 years. And I think ever since I joined the company, I think kind of we have been in this journey. I think it has changed names and perhaps with a different context. But since the beginning, Natura has been working to be a better business for a better world. Of course, at the beginning, we were always trying to understand our footprint in the world, and we started with carbon and circularity and so on. But we have seen how the world is coming, and we understand our role in the world, and of course, understanding the discussions and how the thing is not being sustainable, but we need to regenerate the world. So it has been a fun journey to be in, and with a lot of knowledge that's coming from everywhere and how we build from there. So it's a complicated but fun journey.
Yeah, I have to say, so we spent a lot of time at the business school in preparing and teaching the MBA students. We look at a lot of different definitions of regeneration. And I think there's a few things that have really sort of stood out in that review. It seems really regeneration, it is about recognizing that we have to go beyond the status quo. So if we look at where we are right now, it's like what you said, it's almost sustaining the current pace, the current situation doesn't make sense when we know we're suffering so many interconnected crises. So this idea of always sort of looking at what can we do to go further. And I think there's also an element of it about recognizing it can't just be about nature and climate. It has to be around the interconnection and the interdependencies of people. And then the other part of the definition I really like about regeneration is that it's recognizing it has to be systemic. Like it's something that isn't just about an individual business and what an individual business is doing. It's almost about that interconnection with the wider system. And I remember when we first started talking about the concept of regeneration and Natura, I really loved this idea that we really need to look and take inspiration from nature. And if we look at nature, natural systems will operate in such a way that they coordinate and they manage within themselves. But the requisite for that to really make that system work is that the relationships within that system have to be healthy. And I think what we see in the world right now is that clearly there's a lot of unhealthy relationships when it comes to relationships between people and our relationship with the natural world and the environment. So I love that idea of regeneration being around how do we reconnect and how do we really look at ways of strengthening and healing some of those relationships. But I know relationships is, again, a really important word that has a lot of history at Natura. And, our mantra or our way of being, our reason of being is bem estar bem, which is well being well. So I wondered if you could just reflect a little bit on, again, that point about relationships and, that reason for being and how that kind of connects in your view to how regeneration is really kind of embedding itself within Natura and the systems we operate within.
I think, well, we are part of nature, right? I think that's like the start of everything, and also for the reason of being for Natura, we are part of the world. We need to be in a good relationship with nature, people, and the planet. So I think relationships are everything. I think we were discussing that how we go around the world and how we live our lives. I think it's everything. And for us in Natura, it's so important to have that understanding of the importance of the conversations, the innovations going. It depends on people interacting. So of course, we look at nature as a great inspiration. I think I have studied for a few years biomimicry, and one of the sciences they're looking about the intelligence that the world has, nature has, and how things are so it's almost an art, right? Of how the organisms are around, like the species. So and it has been everything. I think we and after going through a pandemic, I think relationships mean even more, because we were so isolated. And we saw that in our business, like being isolated, not being able to interact and seeing everything that was going around the world. We just came from that experience, just really understanding the meaning and the importance of the connection. And of course, it's where innovation comes, right? And we are not going to be able to thrive if we don't innovate.
Yeah.
So
I think that idea of innovation to drive thriving, using sort of these different ways of thinking about regeneration as kind of our guide. And I think that, another element of the definition of regeneration that I think is important as a distinction to some of the things that have come before is this idea that we need to find ways to create positive impact. And not just on nature, but we have to see ways of creating positive externalities, positive impacts on the social constructs we operate in, the human constructs, and then of course the natural ones. And I feel like one of the things that I think is really interesting and exciting about how we're approaching it at Natura is with a really clear way of measuring our journey to regeneration with the IPNL, the integrated profit and loss. And I know this is something that your team sort of runs and manages for Natura. So I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on like the IPNL and how that connects to the regeneration journey.
Perfect. So within our sustainability department, we are actually scientists, right? So I am a scientist by trade. I'm a biologist. And I think we need data, so we need to understand what we are aiming for. We need to measure things. At least that's how we approach it. And when we started this journey of science, of sustainability, thriving by science, we started with carbon footprint, right? But carbon is not everything. It's not the only thing that we need to understand, grasp, and try to measure and to diminish our footprint. And then how can we do it? We started looking at like water. Well, what is the water footprint? How are we going to deal with that? But then you have water and carbon. So how do you make a choice? It is almost impossible. So then we started like 10 years ago, maybe 11 years ago, we started looking at externalities. And we had like a long journey of understanding how to measure externalities. And then we created the IPNL, the integrated profit and loss, together with a lot of different partners, which is very important. We never do things by ourselves. We need to be along with, other institutions and other people. And the IPNL help us really understand what is it's not the real footprint, because it is a methodology, but what is the positives and the negative impacts that we create in the world, so we can really understand the best way to create positive impact, right? So we can measure it. So it is a very important tool, because it helps us make the right choices. Yeah. And of course, it also helps us to teach management and the high leadership what is the best direction that we should follow. So it has been a journey. It has been, we have been measuring the IPNL, I think, for 3 years now, reporting externally. Yeah. We do generate now $2.5 dollars per, or or reais per dollar of revenue. It is a measurement. So that's the number that we have, but it's much more than that, because we can really look at every aspect of our business and make the choices that need to be made so we can be a regenerative business.
Yeah, I think the IPNL is such a great tool. And I actually, when I talk about it, I often think about it as being like a heat map. And because when you actually look at the report that comes out, it shows where there's areas of green, where we are creating that positive impact, that positive externality, but also it shows the areas that are in red, which are the areas we know we have to use as sort of our focus for our innovation if we want to see those go from being negative to positive. And I think it's really great when you can see it. It's like it literally is a heat map that shows you where to focus on. And I think that transparency is important as well. I mean, I think there's a lot of companies that are getting accused of greenwashing, and this is a way where we can be like, you know, we're not saying everything is great. We're really clear that there are some areas that we need to work on. So that is like the heat map element of it. But I also know that we talk about the EIP&L as the journey map as well, because we are on this journey to become a regenerative business. We're not one now, but that's sort of our ambition. But the way that we'll know if we reach that sort of destination is that we will have positive impacts across all those capitals, the social, the human, and the natural capitals, as well as, of course, as a business, our produced capital. So I really like that it's, you know, a way for us to take decisions and inform some of the innovation that we have happening in the business. And it's a way for us to almost be able to check how are we doing on this goal that we have to be a regenerative business. Now, obviously, when we talked about the definitions of regeneration, engaging in like systems level change is part of it. And I guess I wonder if you could wave a magic wand. You know, we are in Oxford, which is the land of Harry Potter. And so if we did have a magic wand that we could wave, who are the sorts of partners that you would love to be a part of the regeneration journey, not just with Natura, but with all companies that are sort of looking for ways of really going to the edge and going beyond what we're currently seeing in our system right now? Like, who would you love to be working with on that journey that maybe is not on the journey at the moment, or maybe is earlier on in the journey?
That's a complicated question. I would say that the big companies, like, I don't know, oil and gas, because those are the ones that are really have a huge impact, and they need to change so we can really see change in the world. So of course we love working with academia, we love working with all of the different movements that we work with, but really having this like really big companies seeing that it's important to be part of that journey, I think it would be like my ideal. Yeah, right. Because I know that it's not an easy journey for them to thrive on, but very important. Everyone needs to be part of this journey. So the ones that are farthest away, I think are the ones that I would like to see joining the movement.
I like that brave, that boldness of who is furthest away, and those are the people that we need to work closely with. I feel like I'm really interested, as you know, in accountants, and I feel like that I have a T-shirt that says "Accountants will save the world," and I know you have a matching one, and maybe we'll end up next Tea Talk. We'll both wear our "Accountants will save the world" T-shirt. But I feel like that's another really interesting group that would be great to partner with even more deeply. Is like, how do we get the accounting industry to really understand the IP&L and almost help us spread it to other different organizations. Now, we sort of mentioned that you've kind of come in from Brazil. You're here in Oxford, but you're usually based in Sao Paulo. And I guess I wonder if you could reflect a little bit on, you know, we talk a lot about, as part of the regeneration journey, concepts like the bioeconomy and the socio-bioeconomy. But what would you like the world to know about when it comes to these kinds of concepts and what it means in practice for a company to embrace regeneration and embrace an engagement with the bioeconomy and the socio-bioeconomy?
I think the main message is that it's possible. You know, we work with communities very close to them. So it's not something that we just purchase from them, but we are close to them. And we teach them, but they teach us so much more. So it is very important for businesses and for the world to understand that it's possible, that we can do it without having a bad impact in the environment, respecting these communities, indigenous people, it is possible to do it, right? And still make a profit out of it, still being a business that needs to make a profit for their investors. So I think that's the main message, and how this brings a different type of value for a business like Natura. You can see that Natura, even though it is not known, its products are not known around the world, but the company is known. People understand what Natura does and how it really works. It drives the business. And we see how really creates a business that is ready for the next 10, 20, 30, 100 years.
Yeah, I like that. Like the forward looking and recognizing we are going to see a lot of change in this world. And so what are the things we can do today to prepare ourselves and to actually be engaging and helping shape the direction, and recognizing it's about inviting others. It's not just about what we ourselves are doing as a business, but how are we working with others? I think one of my favorite stories about the bioeconomy and the socio-bioeconomy that just really shows it's possible is the story of the kuba tree. And I love this story so much. And I know you're not supposed to have a favorite tree, because it's kind of like you can't have a favorite of something where there's so many different kinds and they're all so beautiful. But I remember learning the story of the ukuba from Natura, and that it was a tree that was sort of on the red list, being endangered, and because it was getting cut down to make broomstick handles. The wood was being used for that use, which didn't feel like a great use. And you've talked a lot about the scientists that are on our team, and I think it's important to note that there's obviously the chemists and the biologists and those that are working on the ingredients. There's also the social scientists, like the cultural anthropologists. And I love the story that through the relationship that some of these social scientists were able to develop with some of the indigenous and traditional peoples in the Amazon, they learned that the seed of the akuba tree actually has these amazing nourishing properties. And I thought it was really great when they told the story of how the team worked with those cooperatives in the Amazon in order to help set up associations where they could then buy the seeds. And that in itself made it more of an incentive to not cut down the tree, but rather to regeneratively harvest the seeds and then, sell them to Natura or sell their butter to Natura. And it's like, just as you said, it shows that it's possible that you can have these sorts of relationships and business models that enable you to create value for the planet, because those trees aren't getting cut down anymore. It's value for nature because it encourages the biodiversity. But really importantly, it's good for the communities, because all of a sudden they are having a more regular income stream with these seeds, and they have their cooperative and associations. So they have sort of a level of ownership. They do have ownership with what happens and how they spend that money, whether it's to do youth programs or solar panels. And then, the fourth piece of that is that as a business, we have a beautiful product and we have a way of talking to our partners, our consumers about exactly as you said, that it is possible. So I think that is a great story that we should be sharing as widely as possible and inviting others to sort of join us on that sort of bioeconomy, socio-bioeconomy journey. Well, I think that was an amazing discussion. I know just being in conversation with you, Ines, and just hearing how this is feeling in Brazil and at Natura is just helping me understand a little bit more practically what does it mean to be on this regenerative journey. So huge thanks. Now, I know you didn't come all the way just for this tea talk, but I'm really glad we were able to have you come up to Oxford and engage in this conversation. Now, I understand that actually we have a few questions that have been sent in by the audience. I know they're sort of sitting right here. You ready to tuck in? Shall we go in and
Yes.
see what people have on their minds when it comes to the journey to being a regenerative business? Okay, so this first one's for you, Ines. How can businesses assess where they are on the regenerative journey? Are there tools or benchmarks?
See, we already talked about one. So for Natura, we use the IP&L, the Integrated Profit and Loss, and it really gives us a good direction. It has been like a 10-year project, but I feel that it's a good way to start, like having a measurement and then understanding what is the journey and where you aim to arrive. I think it's very important. But of course, there are many other different tools. It's important that you have an understanding what works for you, what is the material issues for your business, and then, of course, design a journey for it.
Yep. And I would just sort of add to that. I think this is also where certifications and verifications can actually come in and play a role. And actually, one of our colleagues from Natura and I, we wrote, along with some people from Oxford, a piece in Harvard Business Review last year. So it was Roberta Rosler. And we wrote a piece that was trying to really understand, not as much on the measurement side, because as you said, I think the IPNL is a really great tool, that heat map and that journey map, but looking at different certifications and verifications. So I know we talked about UEBT, which is the Union of Ethical Biotrade. As an organization, we have a great relationship with us at Natura. I know our Chief Sustainability Officer is the president of the board of UEBT. But I think those sorts of organizations that have sort of, again, that sort of separation from the organization, that have a set of criteria that they're looking to see met in order to use sort of that regenerative language can also really be important. So I think those are interesting. It's not the tool, a management tool like the IPNL, but it's a way to be on that journey with others so you can learn and share and again, have that expertise around you.
Perfect. So ready for the next question?
Yeah, let's see.
So let's see. Practically speaking, how does regeneration work where rubber meets the road?
Yeah, where rubber meets the road. So I think that really comes down to decision making, right? So it's where you have a decision you have to make as an organization, and you have to really think about what are the implications of it. And again, I know we're using the IPNL a lot in our answers, but I think that's the tool that helps us to really understand what are the wider externalities that are involved, and so that we can use that when making that decision. And I think those decisions are what really allows us to see when and how regeneration comes to life. I'm also sort of reminded of, we did this regeneration program together, and Oxford came to Natura in Sao Paulo, and Dr. Mary Johnson Louis, who was sort of co-running that session, also shared with us this idea of when you feel like there's a trade-off that you're facing between having to do one thing or the other, to try and really get curious about that trade-off, and instead of thinking about it as being like a binary decision, instead think about, well, how can we really look at what are sort of the assumptions that are in place and sort of take more of a paradox mindset. And I think that's another way for us to sort of think about how to take decisions within the organization that really shows what regeneration looks like at a really practical level, is to be really weighing up a lot of different factors. And yeah, rather than feeling like we're forced into an either or situation, really looking at what that wider set of assumptions are and how we can sort of engage in what third way different forms of innovation could look like.
Perfect.
All right, you ready for another one?
Ready.
All right, let's see. Here's a good one. Is regeneration just the next buzzword, or can it really deliver measurable outcomes?
I hope it can.
Yeah.
I think it can. I think we need to wish for it. I think it's very important, this mind shift that we're having of really understanding our place in the world and how we need to change. I mean, we have seen how climate change and the changes that are happening to the world really affects us. So in Brazil, we saw what happened with Rio Grande do Sul with the rains. Yeah. And like it was a natural disaster, but it really had like epic proportions for businesses as well. So understanding that it really will disrupt the way we live, and really making that change and understanding that we need to have a way of coexisting with nature and with other species and with the world. And making that change, I hope it's possible. And we have seen how working with the communities and having a more healthy relationship with nature, we can thrive as well.
Yeah, I love that, because we know it's possible. And we can't really afford for it to be a buzzword, right? We have to make sure that we are really stepping up to this moment with the innovation, with the relationships, with sort of the system mindset that these times really call for. So I think regeneration really does become almost an invitation and a call to action for organizations that do want to really step in and address this with the level of real sort of I don't want to say disruption, but really disrupting the way things have been done before, to really make sure that we're addressing the challenges head on in the right way. So I'm with you. I think we need to make it possible.
Ready?
Yes.
I think it's the last one.
Last question.
Let's see. Last question. What role do governments, investors, and civil society play in accelerating the regenerative economy?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. Because I know we've spent a lot of time talking about businesses and business in this Tea Talk. And, I come from an activist background, right? I've spent most of my career working in civil society, in NGOs. And I really do think that the system level change that we needs to have coordination amongst all players. Like, we really need to find ways to come together in ways we haven't come together in the past. And I think when we talk about systems change, we have to recognize that there are kind of two parts to systems change. I mean, there's many parts to systems change, but if we sort of boil it down, one part is around structural changes, and that's where really governments really do play an important role. So we do need to see different rules of the game, where all organizations need to work and make sure that they're operating at a certain level. And that really is an important role, structural role that governments play. But the other part of systems change is culture change. And I like the idea that culture is what people do when nobody's looking, right? And there's a great expression that, culture will eat strategy for breakfast, but I actually think culture is hungry. And I think culture will eat everything for breakfast. So we also have to find ways to really partner and work closely with organizations that are involved in that cultural change element. And I think for me, that is civil society. It's how we connect to people. It's working with academia in terms of how we go about teaching and researching some of these questions and making sure actually the next generation of business leaders are going into their roles with different questions and with different case studies of what's possible. So I think we really do need a wide network of civil society, governments, investors, and it goes even beyond that. If we're going to see that systems change really operate at both structural and a cultural level. Well, I think we've gone through all the questions and we've sort of enjoyed a really great conversation. I want to say thank you to all of you who have joined us today. This has been an incredible chance to sort of talk a little bit more about regeneration. We really hope you enjoyed the discussion and we hope you'll tune in for the other episodes that are coming your way. Thank you very much and have a wonderful and very regenerative day.